Let's, we sort of painted a global macro picture. Let's get into some of the specifics of your book, The Crash Course. What are some of the things that you talk about in here that individuals can look at? Not in detail, but just in broad overview guidelines.
The big thing is everybody should be thinking about their reliance on various systems. So I want people to become more resilient. And I think that, as we look at the sweep of history, we've become very, very cost effective. Walmart, extremely cost effective. Just-in-time shipping and inventory management, and the trucks roll in at just the right times and 3 in the morning to restock the shelves. Very cost efficient, not very resilient. So in our own lives, I'm asking people to make the same analysis, which is, how are you really exposed to all these systems? So if you have the heating systems in your house, if the house I just bought only had oil heat in it, and so if I had access to oil, I was warm, and that was it. And if oil price went up, I had to eat the cost, and that was it. So what we did there in my house is put on solar thermal panels, and we got a wood stove in there, and we insulated things, and now my exposure to oil is about half what it was just a year ago. Mm-hmm. And so I'm now more resilient because I have the opportunity to switch across fuel sources and to use less. And I think that makes me a winner as we go forward, because in the story I paint, disposable income that goes towards fuel is just going to rise over time. And that's for structural reasons that are related to where we are in the energy story. So because I'm going to be spending less of my cash on a go-forward basis on energy, I'll be able to spend it on other things. I think that makes me a relative winner. But I paint that same story in this book around our finances, that people don't understand diversification. The old, go into your broker and he'd say, oh, you're totally diversified. I have you in European equities and US equities and some Asian equities, and we've got you in bonds. You are 100% exposed to fiat currency. In fact, you're almost 100% exposed to what the dollar does as the world's reserve currency. That's not diversified. Truly diversified is saying, I'm involved in some assets that when these assets are behaving poorly, these assets will be behaving well. And that's not something that most people actually have access to. I've seen portfolios of extremely wealthy, what I consider very wealthy families, that are 100% exposed to that risk model of either the world does well or it does poorly, and so does your portfolio. So in here, I'm advising people to really think about how they can take some of their wealth out of what I call the tertiary wealth system. It's dollars, papers, bonds, stocks, representations of wealth, and back towards actual wealth. So these are producing assets. I favor companies that actually have assets in the ground that we can identify, touch, feel, go look at if we want. Maybe even in your own personal holdings. I'm a big fan right now of actually buying farmland, of buying woodland. I live in New England where I think people are going to heat a lot with wood going forward. So fantastic investment, buying woodlot right now. Trees that you can see, don't touch them. They happen to grow 6 to 8% a year. It's like a bond, mm-hmm. but it's a tangible asset. So I think, history sweeps, and once upon a time, you were as wealthy as the amount of land you had. There were the landowners and everybody else. And now who do we really value? And the pendulum sweeps over, and we love hedge fund managers. And what's John Paulson doing? And how much did he earn? He doesn't create anything. We're going to be favoring back again towards who's really got the assets, who's got the wealth. And we're going to discover the oldest story in the book, which is that the wealth comes from the earth, and those who have access to it are the ones who actually control the wealth.
And also, following your broader theme of diversifying in order to mitigate risks, you don't have to own the land where you live. You can own the land in other countries where you think the rule of law will be preserved, property rights will be protected, come what may. I mean, it may be hard to find that country, mm-hmm. but the more countries you are diversified, the more likely you're going to end up okay, not having your wealth taken away from you, or your land taxed to the extent where you ultimately want to get rid of it.
Yeah, for people who have enough assets that they can start to play across jurisdictions, I think that's an absolutely brilliant strategy. For a lot of people who don't have sufficient asset base to do that, you've got to adapt in place best you can and
do it through a mutual fund.
Do what you can. Well, maybe that's possible as well. So I do think that that's going to be one of the hardest things to analyze in this story, because one of the fears I have is that when the system really breaks, we'll see capital controls get implemented.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
And then you might discover that you live here, but your assets are there and you can't move them, so what do? And you have a hard choice at that point.
Well, you move to where your assets are.
That's the hard choice.
Yeah, well, it may not be so hard if you can live comfortably somewhere else as well as you lived where you did in...
Absolutely, and for people who can do that, I think that's a very good strategy.
I mean, look what happened in Germany before the Second World War. Any Jew who did not have assets outside the country and couldn't go live somewhere comfortably ended up, tragic consequences. I'm not saying it's going to come to that again in the future, but basically it makes the point that when governments come after you, you have to have a fallback position.
It's always been true in history that there were relatively better places to live. And so, migrating to the United States made extraordinarily good sense at one point in time. And now it might make sense to live in other places. And so I do think that, local mileage is going to vary in this story and how it unwinds. At the same time, this is also a little bit unique in that the whole world is going to really be sharing in this resource story. There is nowhere to go hide at this point. Unless you might, imagine something like Norway, which still has tremendous oil resources, although they're in decline, very rapid decline. But they export almost all of their production. And at some point I could imagine a country like Norway saying, forget the exports. Let's keep that for our own uses. We'll do all the value add here. Instead of exporting crude like a third world nation, we'll put it into our refineries, make second generation products off of that, build an industry around that, and they could sustain themselves as a nation on their oil treasure for a very long time.
Yeah.
Instead of pumping it out as fast as possible and tucking it into a sovereign wealth fund, which represents, you could put their whole sovereign wealth fund on a fob, a computer stick.
Right.
That's their wealth, and they might decide real wealth is actually what you do with this bequeathment that you've got and transforming that yourself. So I can see a story like that where the nations that I would favor, the places I would favor, either have incredibly strong property protection histories, it's cultural, and or incredible resource base compared to their population.
Any other insights from the book that you'd like to share with us before we wrap up?
Yeah, this is a story of change, and so one of the things that is really unfortunate is a lot of people look at this and say, "Oh, that's doom and gloom." I can't see myself stepping into that future, so I'm not going to look at it. And this has been an incredible story of opportunity for me. I'm personally facing insurmountable opportunity right now in my own business, and my portfolio has done incredibly well. And I've cut my standard of living in half, but my quality of life has doubled. I have all these measures that to me I can show to somebody and say, look, this story is really working very well for me, but I had to take the time to understand what the story was, see what was false, see what I think is true now, and I can reorient my life around hard data. And it's working out. And so what I would invite people to do is consider this to be a story of change, which means, yep, there's challenges, there's going to be disruptions, there's going to be crises. You can sidestep those and step over into the places where there are new opportunities. In 1,000 years, people will still be trading, will still be having an economy, people will still be having needs met, and the idea is that those are shifting. So how can we as individuals start to step into that new story first? Because as you mentioned, first movers have an extraordinary advantage in this story.
Yeah, I'm sure people will find the book very thought-provoking, The Crash Course by Chris Martenson, and who's also the founder of the very popular website, chrismartenson.com. Chris, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The pleasure's been mine.